What do you believe right now that's making you feel this way? And when you analyse it, you realise how irrational you can be at times.
Every single one of our major customers and minor customers all shut their doors overnight.
It's not sales per se, but the outcome of it is, because people get to know you, they get to see you.
But, what's the culture like at the business? What do we stand for, the values?
I've got to tick that box on my personal development programme I don't really want to be here.
Scaling up a business isn't easy. If it were, we wouldn't have less than 4% of businesses scaling beyond 10 employees or around £1 million turnover level, and less than 1% beyond 50 employees. But the contribution that we make as owner-managers to our economies is immense and should never be underestimated. Yet it can be a tough gig for all of us at times, and only other business owners truly understand the challenges that we face. And through ScaleUp Radio, we aim to help make things a little easier. We interview guests who have been where you are now and may have faced some of the challenges that you are facing. And they offer their thoughts and advice on what has worked for them, as well as what didn't. And we've also combined many of the lessons from these interviews, and also through working with hundreds of owner managers over the last 10 years or so, into a practical scale-up handbook that we've called the Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System, or ESUS. And it's for owner managers like you and me as we navigate our own scale-up journey. And you can order a copy through your favourite online book retailer, or by going to all the W's, esusgroup.co.uk, www.esusgroup.co.uk.
Hello, I'm Granger Forson, www.bizsmart-gloucestershire.co.uk, or find me on LinkedIn. This time on ScaleUp Radio, I speak with Paul Holbrook, the owner of Diary Detox. Diary Detox is a leader coaching business based in Cirencester. Paul started the business 6 years ago to bring his approach of helping managers to better lead people to a wider audience. In this episode, we discuss everything leadership and management in detail. We cover a lot of ground, including you need to choose to be a manager leader as it's such an important role. The true role of a manager is to make someone or something even better. Managers need to think, communicate, and improve. And manager leaders need to create the space in their diary for green time. What is inspiring about this conversation with Paul is his approach to leader development by starting with asking you to choose. Is it time to lead? Then making space in your diary through the detox and focusing on the real essence of being a leader by leading with love. Yes, love. Listen out for this amazing section in the conversation. I know that you'll get so much out of this episode. I sure did. Let's go over and listen to Paul. So, hello, Paul Holbrook. Welcome to ScaleUp Radio. Please introduce yourself and your business, Diary Detox.
Thank you. I'm Paul Holbrook. You've already done that bit for me. I'm owner of a company called Diary Detox. I spent 20 years in the City of London. I wasn't a banker. And all the way through my career, I had some real frustrations. And the frustrations were that managers just didn't seem to have enough time to do the things that they wanted to do. So about 6 years ago, having got to what I would call the peak of my professional career, my first career, let's call it, I decided that I didn't want to do that anymore. And I wanted to come out and try and create a world of better led people. So that led me to create this business that ultimately ended up doing something really accidental, and then ultimately led to me creating this method called the Diary Detox. So that's what I do.
Brilliant. So creating a world of better led people through a Diary Detox. Give us some explanation in terms of your business, what you do, and how you generate that of better led people.
Well, it's probably worth putting a little bit of context around it, I suppose. When I was, at the peak of, like I said, my first career, I was a managing director. I was running change within an investment bank. And all the way through my career up until that point, managers always seemed to have no time, bizarrely. And importantly, they never really seemed to have enough time to do the one thing that their people needed them to do, which was manage. And my frustrations kind of grew throughout this, and you can only really do so much from within one company. And so eventually I decided to leave, and I actually retrained as a leadership coach. But when I did, and I started to market my business out, interestingly, I kept getting the same argument from people. They'd say, "This is really interesting. I just don't have any time to talk to you." I'd sit there and think, how have you not got time to talk about leadership? I mean, that's kind of part of your job as a manager. And so it got me kind of curious, and it led me to start using a little two-step process that I used to use when I was in my previous career. And it was basically to get people to talk about what they spend their time doing. And when I used to use it back then, it would show me that, in fact, people were doing, the reason they didn't have a lot of time was because they were doing things they didn't really need to do, but they didn't realize it, or they couldn't make the connection. And so when I started my own business and people said they didn't have enough time to talk to me, I thought, I wonder what that technique would tell them if I did it with them now. And interestingly, it told the exact same story. It told them that they were spending their time on a lot of things they didn't really need to do, but kind of had fooled themselves into believing they did. And so although I retrained as a coach and I was kind of struggling to get business down that avenue because of time, I kind of thought, well, hang on, maybe that's my business. Maybe giving people more time to do the things they really need to do. Maybe if that's really the biggest problem that people are experiencing, maybe that's the direction I needed to go in. And so that was the genesis to what became ultimately the Diary Detox. It started off as 2 steps and I created 3 more, because it's all very easy when you're working in a business and you have people working for you to tell them that they don't need to do those things because they'll trust you because you're their manager.
Yeah.
But then when you come out, you can't really take that approach, because often people will say, well, look, you don't know my business. You don't live in my shoes. You can't possibly know my world. And so I realized I had to find a different way of not only getting me to see what was going on, but it was also about getting them to see what was going on and making that realization for themselves. So I realized I needed to add 3 more steps onto the first 2 steps, and that created the 5-step Diary Detox. I started by delivering it to individuals, and then to groups of people. Then I wrote the book. Then I wrote the app. And then it's gone from strength to strength, really, to the point where now there are a variety of things that Diary Detox is working towards. But the key in our story is all about creating a world of better led people. Whenever you hear the phrase Diary Detox, you might think of time management, and that is a trap that we kind of fell into. People started thinking of this as a time management tool, but actually it's a leadership development tool. And so as time has gone on, we've kind of come back round to our roots in terms of leadership development by creating a program called Time to Lead, of which the Diary Detox is one tool in that arsenal. And yeah, it's primarily about giving managers more time, more focus, more self-awareness to lead their people and take their people in a better direction. That's kind of what it's all about.
So more time, more focus, more ability to lead people. So fascinating. And so I want to talk a bit about leadership and your thoughts around leadership. So first of all, what would you say is a good leadership? What are the key sort of facets or skills?
So I'm going to take some liberties here. I'm going to take one liberty here, which is that I think too often we talk about leadership. Mm-hmm. And in all honesty, I think there are many different ways of showing leadership. And I've said this before, and I'll always say it on a podcast. There's a bit of a trigger alert here, because if you were to look at that in its kind of barest form, some people might look at someone like Adolf Hitler and say, he was a great leader because he got people to follow him, right? But that's not really what I'm looking to solve. For me, it's not about what are the aspects of leadership, because you could have a collaborative leader, you could have an authoritarian leader, etc. But what I'm more interested in is what are the things that some leaders will do that means they lead. And I think that also gets us to question, well, what is it? What does it mean to lead? And for me, to lead means that you're ultimately making something or someone better. And that someone could be yourself. This could be leading yourself, leading other people, leading your business. And in terms of that, whenever I'm doing a workshop with somebody, people will say, well, what are those kind of key activities, I suppose, that one would have to do in order to lead? And I'll always go down the route of saying, well, why don't we just have a little exercise? Why don't you think of somebody right now who you think of as a great leader? And I never ask them who it is. It doesn't matter who it is to me. It's more important that they know who it is. And then when they've thought of that person, I'll then go back and say, okay, so just out of interest, why is it that you think of them as a leader? You know, what effect is it they are having that ultimately singles them out as a leader for you? And more often than not, they'll say, well, because, you know, I think they're going to make the world a better place, or because I think they took me to a better place. And I said, well, and that's right. Okay, so leaders are ultimately people we follow because we think they're going to take us to a better place. And so when we then got that bit kind of cordoned out, I suppose, what we then go is say is, well, okay, so let's assume that you want to make something or someone better. What generally are the things you need to do in order to make someone or something, or even yourself, better? And essentially, I believe it comes down to three things. I think you have to think about how you're going to make the world better. You know, you will hear people talk about creating their mission statement, their purpose, their values, their vision, their strategy, and their long-term plan. And that's the first kind of step. You've got to think about, well, what is it you want to change? What is it you want to make better? Once you've done that, and this is an interesting one because the second one, if you think of my old world being in change management, the second one is actually the one that is missed out the most, and probably the biggest reason that most change programs fail is because the second one is, well, then you've got to share that idea with other people. Yeah, it's too often companies will say, we've got this great idea, and then they'll go and do it. But they won't actually bring any of their people on the journey with them. They won't ask them if they agree with them, or even, you know, God forbid, ask their opinion. So the second part is communicating, and that's sharing that idea with somebody else to get their thoughts on it. Do they agree? Do they see potential issues? You know, we have very senior leaders in the world who are too often too far removed from the coalface in order to be able to say, well, I think if we change this, it'll make it better. It's like, you've no idea. You haven't been there for years. So communicating that idea, sharing that idea, but also meeting new people and creating new relationships is part of that as well. And that's just two of the things. And at this point, you've only really got ideas and words. You haven't really got anything that's got better. And so the last thing is you need some actions. And so the final action is improving. You actually have to do it. And that could be anything from as simple as making a decision to do something. So if you're a very senior person and you've got this great new change program, making the decision to go ahead, that could be considered as an improvement in itself. And then it kind of puts all the wheels in motion to enact that change. Or it could be that you're actually physically making the improvement yourself. But that could also be improving yourself by reading a book or listening to a podcast like this one we're on now.
Yeah.
So those are the three key elements: thinking, communicating, and improving. And if you're doing those three things, then in essence, the effect will be that you will improve something. And given that leading is about improving, that's what leaders do.
Yes, I totally agree with that in terms of some of the structures, very much so. So I always think about the terminology, are you a leader or a leader follower? Yeah, so are you creating followers, or actually are you creating other leaders? My background from my side in continuous improvement and lean through the Toyota production system, you're always trying to create the next leaders, the next people that are capable in terms of doing stuff. And that doesn't happen if they just follow you. They have to be self-reliant, self-capable in terms of doing that. So I think that's a very important aspect of leadership, is to grow other leaders. And how do you do that? Well, I think a lot of leadership and people that I've met in my careers are not that way in thinking in terms of doing it. It's all about command and control and those structures in terms of doing that. And I'm really interested in this share, communicate, and improve, because absolutely, I think that is vital. And I've not thought about it at the level of the communicate, though. In my background, we talk about spreading the good and actually getting everything ready before you start making the change happen. And we talk about consensus. Consensus, often we think, is everybody agreeing. It's not. It's everybody having their say. So let's explore, if we may, just explore this a bit more. So talked about the three elements: thinking, communicate, and improve. So the thinking bit. What are the types of things that you would recommend for people to, as a leader, to start on the journey of thinking about how to improve their thinking?
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, there's a number of different ways you can do that. So in terms of improving, okay, there's ways of doing thinking and there's ways of improving your thinking, because don't forget, the improving is the last part, right? So in terms of thinking about it, I think you can get feedback. Yeah, you can go and, you can actually go out for a walk and you can go and think about it. That's the first thing you could probably do. Second thing you could do is you could go and ask feedback from people. You could talk to them about what they see in you and what feedback they would give you. And that could be your clients, that could be your manager, could be your peers, could be your life partner, could be your people. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how, we often kind of assume that managers are there to kind of be the authority and be the all-knowing, all-seeing authority over everything. But I think people are generally, they know pretty well what's working and what's not working for them. And they certainly know how you as a leader might be making them feel. And so I think asking that question, and this is a big one for me, asking questions is quite a good example of thinking, because when you're asking questions, you're getting potentially a new opinion on something. So I think definitely seeking other people's opinion on what they see in you. And I think those are the kind of key ones for me in terms of thinking about improving yourself, but also you could go read a book about how you could improve your thinking. It gets a little bit blurry at that point, because for me, I think that reading kind of comes more into the improving part, you're kind of learning something new, etc. But I think getting feedback is a great way of doing it. And too many leaders just don't ask for that kind of feedback. They kind of assume they need to have all the answers.
And you say it's the first step, is this thinking about, what is you need to do, change, happen, etc. in terms of doing that. So improving that level of thinking and how you go about it. Yeah, very much in terms of feedback. So okay, I can see that. So then we talk about sharing or the communicate steps, so the step of communicate. So what would be good for leaders to be thinking around this step for?
Making time for their people and talking with them is a really good start. And again, this is not hugely overdone. It's overdone, it's not even done. My really good friend of mine was working at one very, very large organization in the UK. And they were talking about one of the things they wanted to try and improve with regards to culture and buy-in from their people. And it was interesting, as we talk through it, I'm quite a root cause thinker. I'll always kind of think, what's actually at the root of that? And one of the things that I got down to was talking about, I wonder how much time they're spending with their manager. Do they feel supported by their manager? And when I asked them, I said, just out of interest, how often are the managers actually sitting down and just chatting with their people? It could be a directed conversation. It could be a free-form conversation. And he turned around to me and he said, generally, they will sit down and speak with their manager once a year. And you sit there and you go, oh, wow. I mean, once a year, how can you have any kind of a conversation? How can you generate any kind of a relationship? How can you share any ideas about anything when you're seeing somebody maybe once a year? And what kind of stories are those people telling themselves in their own heads with this absence of any other conversation? So I think one of the greatest things that leaders can be doing is sitting down and making time for their people to just talk to them. And, too often I think we see managers ask their people what it is they're doing. And I think too little are we hearing managers start the conversation with the question, how are you doing? Just making time for people and actually talking to them is a pretty good start. And Simon Sinek always says he's embarrassed that he has a job doing what he does. He shouldn't need this stuff because this should be kind of day one, page one stuff. And I kind of agree with this. The fact that I'm giving advice that suggests, the first thing you can do as a great leader is just make time for your people and sit down and chat with them. It's ridiculous that we should even be having this conversation in 2023.
Wow, I mean that then it's right. I'm just going to come back to that in a thought in just a second, but I just wanted to a recent article I was reading on the CEO of Starbucks, and he did the full onboarding orientation to become a barista, which takes 6 weeks in Starbucks. He did the full of that, and every month he spends a day out on the shop floor somewhere in a Starbucks, actually talking and serving coffee, because he learns in terms of doing that. So I mean, that in itself brings an element of communication with the teams and the clients in terms of understanding that. But just want to go back to that brilliant statement you made. Here we are in 2023 and we're still not getting this right. What's your thoughts and opinions? I know I'll have mine, and probably we could spend a year talking about this, but what are your thoughts and opinions of why we're still not getting this right?
So there's a couple, and I don't feel uncomfortable saying this. I just feel it's a bit sad that we kind of have to say this, really. I think there's two reasons. If I start with the first one, which I think is probably more symptomatic, and then I'll talk about the second one, which I think is more about root cause. So I think symptomatically, I just think most people that get into manager roles, it sounds bizarre, but they don't realize that this is what they're there to do. It sounds ridiculous, which is kind of why I hesitate, right? Most managers, it's really interesting. When I look at managers from when I was working in the City of London, and the best way I can do this is by using an analogy. And when you use this analogy, people kind of go, that's ridiculous. It's like, yeah, but that's what's happening. And if you think about an airplane, okay? In an airplane, you've got a pilot and you've got a co-pilot. Now, contrary to popular belief, the person that flies the plane the majority of the time is actually the co-pilot. The co-pilot is learning. They're basically flying it under supervision of the captain. And if you were to apply the management approach of most organizations, certainly many of the organizations that I've worked in the City of London, if you apply that to the flight deck, this is kind of how the average flight, this is how a flight might unravel. Okay. Is that the co-pilot might start to make a bit of a mistake. And the captain would just look over and go, And it would get a little bit worse. And the captain would just be looking out the window the other way. And then it would get worse. And then the captain would still be looking out the window the other way. And then it would get to the point where ultimately the plane crashed. And if the two of them managed to survive the crash, at that point, the captain would turn around and go, why on earth did you do that? That is the application of popular management thinking in things like the City of London on a flight deck. Now, of course, anybody that looks at that will go, but that's ridiculous. I mean, that's not the point. It's like, but that's what managers are doing. Most managers think that delegation of responsibility is about saying, there you go, you do that, I'm going to go over here and do this, and then not looking at that thing ever again, because we're worried about micromanaging our people. They'll just leave them to it. And then when it goes wrong, they'll come back and say, oh, can't believe you did that. That is terrible. You should never have done that. And when you see that, you look at it, you think, I wonder why that is. And from my experience, it's because most managers actually don't believe that helping their people to succeed, keeping a watchful eye over everything, not from a micromanagement helicopter point of view, but just from a care and support point of view, they're there to just kind of keep an eye on things, make sure everything's okay. And then if things start to go wrong, their job is to come in and go, are you okay? Is everything all right? What can I do to help? What barriers can I remove? What would make this a lot easier to deliver? And that's just not what managers do. So that's why I think it's happening from a symptomatic point of view. Why do I think ultimately it happens? What's the root cause? I'll be honest, I think we promote far too many people to management who simply should not be a manager. We've got this concept called accidental management. People who are just really, really good at doing something, like a salesperson, for example. They're really, really great at sales. And then ultimately we're on the lookout for the next sales manager. And then when the position comes free, we'll go, look at that. She's brilliant at selling. Let's make her the sales manager. But the problem is just because you're great at selling, it doesn't make you great with people. And from a manager point of view, your job is not to sell. Yeah, a sales manager's job is not to sell. Her sales manager's job is to get the best out of their people so that they can sell. And I think too often we make really bad decisions about who we promote. And if we were to start promoting people who were more predisposed to, and I'm going to use a word here we don't use in business anywhere near enough, but I'm looking to change this. I think we promote managers that just don't love people enough, and hence they don't lead with love. And, you know, you think about this if you had a child, yeah? If your child was failing in some way, if they were struggling at school, your approach wouldn't be to just let them fail. And then when they failed their exams, go, why did you fail your exams? You'd certainly hope as a parent, you'd go in and go, is everything okay? What can I do to help? And it's like, if we could get managers to start acting like that, not treating their people as if they were children, but treating them as if they were their children, I think we would certainly be a long way down the road towards creating a world of better led people.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I mean, you talk about maybe getting the best out of people. What I talk about is the purpose of the manager, the leader, is to create the environment so people can thrive and survive and grow, you know, and that's the analogy in the servant leadership type thinking, which is around the garden. You know, yeah, you plant the seed as the gardener. Yeah, you nurture the plant through feeding it, through watering it, by giving it the right sunlight, by putting the right plant in the right position in the garden. Yeah, you occasionally have to sort of prune it and pull it back so it goes to the right direction and achieves what needs to happen, the best success for that plant. And sometimes you have to do a bit of weeding, and you have to remove some of the difficulties and the rot and etc. that's taking place. So, you know, to me, exactly what you're saying there, you use the word love. I totally agree with that in terms of its structure. As the purpose of leadership is to create the environment so people can create their best work rather than telling them specifically. Now, environment means, you know, you've got to do the training. You've got to train people. You've got to give them the right training, the capabilities. The processes have to be strong enough so they don't fail and fail the individual in terms of doing things. But then the creation of that individual to then blossom within that environment is the key thing. And I love that you use the word love in terms of doing that. So you were hesitant, you said, about using the word love. Why do you hesitate? What's the bit around that?
It's probably the history in the industry that I've come from, right? I was in banking, and you know, if you use the word love, it probably sends you to the funny house. It would just be like, you know, it would be like, well, we've got a tree hugger here, we can't go anywhere near this person. But the thing is, as time has gone on, it does feel more about love. You know, I think, you know, if we look at some of the leadership development stuff that we've seen over the year, I mean, I've seen goodness knows how many leadership development programs being run, not from ones that I've been part of, but things that I've witnessed be run. And I've seen, you know, all of the social media posts that talk about how we want leaders to be empathetic, how we want them to develop their EI rather than their EQ, how we want them to care about their people, how we want them to nurture their people, how we want them to invest in their people, how we want them to become servant leaders, how we want them to coach them and to mentor them. And you're sitting there, you're thinking, yeah, I mean, there's nothing new here, right? I mean, nobody's saying anything shockingly revelationary here. They're not going, oh, what, mentoring? What a great idea. We've all heard it, but nobody seems to be doing it. And when I look at that, I think, so we all know what the skills are, but we're still not doing them. And it just kind of occurred to me one day that if we could create managers who generally look for love in what they do, all of those things that we've been begging managers to do for years, all the things that we've spent millions of pounds trying to train managers to do for years, but they still don't do, they would happen more naturally if you put people in management positions who lead with love. I mean, that's kind of what it means, right? Leading with love is looking for how you can get the best out of people, how you can create the conditions. That's what it's all about. So I think it's taken a while to say it. Probably, do you know what? I will put my hands up. I know what it is exactly. It's because as a business owner, and I started this business from scratch 7 years ago, it's probably for fear, for scaring off potential clients using that word, if I'm really honest. And I've been doing some work over the years with a lady called Rachel Savage, and she's helped me create my brand story. You know, I know what I do, I know how I do it, I know why I do it, but I didn't know how to say it to other people in a way that would resonate with them. And it really struck me one day that she took me on a journey, and that word just kept coming up because it's at the core of me. That's what I want to do. You know, when I don't get emotional when I watch films if something sad happens. I get emotional watching films when something good happens. When I see somebody achieve something they've always wanted to achieve. When I see someone who's been oppressed or bullied finally break out and shine, I get really emotional. I cry at those kind of films, right? I love development and success and reaching your potential. That's what I do. And that word just kept coming up. And then one day Rachel just said, what will happen if we just start using that word? What do you reckon is going to happen? And at that moment, the purpose of the business, the story that we're looking to change in the world changed. And it went away from just creating a world of better led people, and it came to disrupting the existing story of leadership from a place where managers rule by fear to a place where they lead with love. And that just seems to resonate more with people. And it kind of has two effects. It kind of pushes away those people that go, yeah, that's a bit woo-woo. I'm not sure that's for us. Well, then you're not my client. There's no point in me trying to convince you and trying to sell to you, because quite frankly, you don't get it. But for those where you say it and they go, oh, wow, that got me there, right? You're a potential client. You're a true believer. You're on the journey and you share our purpose. And so, yeah, I think I'm still getting used to saying it and saying it freely. I'm kind of out of the love closet, as it were.
Awesome. Well, no, I think it's a very powerful word. And when we first met and you said it, it resonated with me very much so, and that's why I wanted to sort of explore that through this conversation, leading with love. I mean, that's such a powerful statement when you actually think about it and actually start to think and then communicate and then think about how am I going to improve? How am I going to develop that? It is a very powerful way of doing it. And yes, it's probably also a very strong deselecting way, because those that won't maybe never will anyway.
Yeah, I think if you ever watch the Start With Why presentation from Simon Sinek, he talks about the early adopters, the early and late majority, and he's got the laggards. And the laggards are those people who hear the word love and they run a mile. And it's like, great, off you go do your thing. They might come round. They might come round eventually. And if they do, and when they do, I'm here and I'm ready to have a conversation with them. But I think you have to pass the first test, which is that if you don't see the value of love in leadership because you've seen so much hate in leadership, what is it, 50% to 75% of people say their manager is the worst and most corrosive part of their job. I mean, That's not good.
Yeah.
So I think you have to pass the first test. And if that word love resonates with you, then welcome, come through the door and let's have a conversation.
And I'd probably also maybe not always put, that they're hateful in terms of that. Maybe sometimes they're just apathetic because they don't actually know how to be a manager, be a leader in terms of the right way. So they've always just done what they've always just done. So therefore, they don't build that environment. They don't build that leading from love because they've never known anything else. I don't think they're often corrosive. I just think they're just useless as a manager. And I think your root cause definition of we promote the wrong people is probably quite apt in those situations. So we talked about the three phases. We talked about the thinking, the communication, and now the improve. So what comes out? So we've had a fantastic conversation about communication and how that drives to love. What comes out then in the improve phase? What do they need to start doing or thinking about there?
So improving is action. And for me, it kind of comes down to three things. And it's in this order very deliberately. It's improving yourself, improving those around you, and then improving something. And that something could be anything. It could be a process, it could be a department, it could be a team, it could be a business, it could be a product, it could be anything. So we start with the improving yourself. And, you have that thing. It's a shame that those masks that fall down from an aircraft, when they do fall down, it's a shame that they're orange, because they could do with being green. Because my belief with this is that if you don't learn to lead yourself, then you can't possibly hope to lead others. And it's the same thing with the mask, right? If you don't put your own mask on, you can't breathe. And if you can't breathe, you can't help other people. So whilst it might seem really selfish, it's just a sad reality of the fact that you've got to develop yourself in order to be in a better position to develop others. So that's about self-improvement. And it could be anything as simple as reading a book or listening to a podcast. It could be going and getting coaching. It could be getting some mentoring. It could be any number of things like that. So that's in terms of improving yourself. In terms of then, or getting training, of course, I think is another example, of course. But then let's assume that you've done that. Let's say you got to that point. Then what's the next thing? Well, you could try and improve a company from there. But the thing is that a company is full of people. So if you can get the people so they're improved, then you'll have a far greater opportunity to improve something else. So from improving yourself, it's then on to improving others. And that can be about having conversations with others about how they can improve themselves, or about how you can help them improve. And the same way, again, as much as improving yourself is about getting coaching or getting mentoring, improving others is also about mentoring and coaching people.
Yeah.
So that's that. And obviously giving them recommendations. If your people want to go on a particular course that's going to improve them, then you making the decision to allow them to go, that's an improvement. That's you making the decision. And so then once you've got yourself in a great place and you've got your people in a great place, then theoretically the rest of it is just gravy, right? I mean, if you've got everybody else to a point where they're operating at a better level, and when you were talking about, being a leader is about creating followers or creating other leaders. Well, if you're improving other people, you could be creating other leaders. And the more leaders you have, and you don't have to be managing people to be a leader. Yeah, this is about improving yourself. Even in the playground, a child can be a leader just by trying to improve the life of somebody who's being bullied. Yeah, let's just talk about leadership for what it really is, about making something better, even somebody's life. So once you've got these better people, then you've got a bigger opportunity to multiply the effects of improving processes, teams, organizations, products, clients, situations. Who knows what it could be? It could be a whole ream of things, but it kind of all comes back to starting at the very beginning, which is about the thinking. What do you really want to improve?
And I love the way in that conversation there you talk about improving, not changing, because actually you can't change anybody, and actually you can't change a business. And you talked about where you came from. You were the change director or something, and managing. Yeah, actually, change is confrontational. Change is you're trying to change me. You're trying to do I'm trying to change myself. Yeah, where improvement is always, well, what's the first step? What's the next step? What's the next step? Improvement is those small little iterations, the fantastic book, Atomic Habits, those small little iterations that you build up over time. And that's what real improvement's about. So I love the way you use improve, not change.
I mean, there's actually a reason that I do that. I was once on a golf course with somebody who runs their own business, and they turned around to me and they said, "I've got a bit of a problem, Paul." And I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Well, I've got this thing that we run on a Friday afternoon, and I basically ask everybody in the company to suggest something that we can change." And I went, "Right, okay." And he said, "Well, the thing is, nobody ever says anything." And I said, "Yeah, I kind of agree with that, really." And he went, "What do you mean you agree with that?" And I said, "Well, why should they change?" And he said, "Well, what do you mean, why should they change?" And I said, "Well, why should they change?" And he said, "Well, because we want to make things better." And I said, "But you haven't said improve." I said, "You just said change." I said, "From my experience of being a change manager, and I think language is the root of all evil with many of the problems we have in this world." I said, "When people hear the word change, it's as likely they might think that you mean negative change as well as positive change." And he said, "But why would they think negative?" I said, "Well, whenever we try to implement change within banking, the first thing that people heard, change program means redundancy eventually." I said, "Why would anybody vote for that? That's turkeys voting for Christmas, right?" I said, "So what would happen is if instead you said to them, can everybody make a suggestion on something we could improve? And he said, well, I haven't really thought of it like that. I said, well, I know that's why we're having a conversation. But I think that's the key, right? I don't want change. I want improvement. Change could be bad as well. And with a lot of change programs, if you called it an improvement program, I think there are a lot of change programs that are actually in the process of making things worse for the company that they are being run within. Yeah. And if you call it a change program, people will go, well, yeah, it's a change program. It is creating change. But if you called it an improvement program and it's not making positive change, I'm really hoping that people will go, well, it's called an improvement program and it's not improving things. And just having somebody put their hand up is the start of leading. It's the start of somebody going, hang on a minute, I don't agree with that. This isn't working. We need to find another way. So yeah, improve. I tend not to use that word change very much unless I'm talking about my history.
So one final sort of thought in terms of that. So, you're asking leaders now to do more thinking, to do more communicating and do more improving. So where do they find the time? Is that where then the sort of diary detox then comes into it?
Yeah. So, we're going back to the original challenge, right? So I was starting a coaching business. Now, I don't advertise myself as, I'm a qualified coach, but I don't advertise myself as a coach because that's not what I predominantly do. But interestingly, the less I've spoken about it, the more coaching I actually do now. I've got 2 C-suite clients at the moment that haven't been specifically grabbed. They've just had a conversation and gone, oh, that's an interesting way of thinking about things. Would you mind coaching me? But what's interesting is that when I was running that business, of course, people were saying, oh, I don't have any time. I haven't got any time to do that stuff. And when I then started kind of digging in and saying, well, just give me a sense of what it is you are filling your time with, then it becomes quite clear that a lot of their time is spent on what we call the amber stuff, the red stuff, or the grey stuff. And interestingly, earlier on, you spoke about command and control. And interestingly, command and control is very much what we talk of as amber behavior. It's called managing or supervising. Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm checking things to make sure they're okay, or I'm telling people what to do, giving them direction, not asking them questions. I'm just telling them what to do. But of course, when I'm not there, they have no idea what to do because they haven't developed their own thinking. So they either get caught into doing that, but actually more often than not, they get caught into the red stuff and the grey stuff. And the red stuff is productivity. It's not necessarily bad. It's just bad if you're doing too much of it relative to your role. And a leader should be spending more of their time grey and less of their time on the red. The red stuff should be done by the people that they're delegating to. And they get caught in doing that stuff like, oh, it's just quicker if I do it myself. That is a classic manager then taking somebody. That's like going into the garden and saying to the flower, don't you worry about this. I got this. I'll grow for you. And it's like, well, that's never going to work, right?
Yes,
so,
I'll attract the bees.
Yeah, I'll do it. You just sit there and just chill out. So they either get caught doing the red stuff, but quite a lot of their time is actually spent on the grey stuff. And the grey stuff is what we call floating. And floating is about stuff that is not really adding any value, or we're not sure whether we're adding value. So it's a grey area, hence the colour. And the interesting thing is that actually more of their time is spent on that than they realise. And when I go into an organisation and run a discovery, people by their own admission are spending about 20% of their time every week on grey stuff, on the floating, which is not adding value or not being sure what value you're adding. Now, if you do the maths, 20% is 1 day. So 1 day a week is being spent on stuff that adds no value whatsoever. And sometimes we actually convince ourselves it's probably green. And it's usually when it's a meeting with our boss, we'll say, oh, that's definitely a green meeting. And actually, this did happen to me. I sat down with a CIO who swore blind that the meeting with their boss was green until I asked them one question. I said, if that meeting with your boss were to be cancelled and never rebooked, what would you lose? And they said nothing. And it's like, that's the definition of floating. That's not adding any value whatsoever. You're saying if we didn't do it, it wouldn't matter, is effectively what it is. So in terms of where did they find their time, most people in in every organization I've seen, there's an average of about 20% of their time. So a day a week is just going on stuff that isn't adding any value. So they could get that day just there straight away, just by being able to spot it and have a better way at batting that away. But I think a lot of it can also be got from showing managers to reduce the amount of red they're doing and find better ways of delegating that using some of the amber behavior and some of the green behavior as well.
And green is
the leading, right? That is the leading. That is the asking people questions. Often somebody will come to you, let's say somebody doesn't know how to do something, and they'll come and tap you on the shoulder. And I always use this as a great example with managers. And they say, yeah, but they keep tapping me on the shoulder. They don't know how to do something. So what do I do? And I said, well, you got 3 options. I said, option 1 is you can just tell them to just go away. I said, that's probably quite grey. That's not really adding any value. I said, the second option is you could go and do it for them. I said, that's quite red. I mean, it will get done, but next time it's needed, you'll have to do it again. That's not really making anything any better. You got another option, which is you could go quite amber, which is you could basically tell them what to do. You could say, okay, well, do that, then do that, then do that, then do that. And they might remember some of it, but they won't necessarily remember all of it. And therefore, next time they'll probably come to you again and ask you a bit more, and so on. Or you could do the green stuff. And my trick, I suppose, when I was a manager in the city, and it's usually really good with people you have working for you who aren't particularly confident. They're finding it hard to break through. They've got a bit of imposter syndrome. Is I would often say to them, okay, let's say that I wasn't here. You couldn't find me and you needed to do this. What would it be your instinct to try? And instantly you've asked a question. And questions for me is not about directing anybody, it's about coaching. What would you do if I weren't here? And what's interesting is that 9 times out of 10, the answer that they come up with is exactly the thing that I would have done. Yeah, actually, no, 8 times out of 10. It was the answer I would have come up with. And what's lovely about that is you can say, do you know what? I totally agree with that. It's a great idea. Give that a whirl and see where you get to. And that's not only given me some confidence that they know what they're doing, it gives them some confidence that they know what they're doing and starts to build their confidence. But there's 2 other possibilities. It might be that they gave me an answer that I think, oh no, I wouldn't do that. And at that point, I can start to have more conversation. I can ask more questions to help bring out their thinking, understand why they're thinking that way, and maybe change an assumption. But every so often, there's a little nugget. They'll tell me what they would have done, and it wouldn't have been what I'd said, but it was better. And too often, managers jump in with the amber stuff. They say, well, this is what I do. Do it this way, do it this way, do it this way. And they're losing the opportunity for that person not only to show that they can do it, but actually to show that they can do it better. And if we just don't ask the question, then we're not leading. It is as simple as that. So yeah, that's my thinking.
Brilliant, Paul. That's really, really interesting and fantastic. So one final question. Let's go back to your business now. So, if we're meeting again in 5 years, and I'm sure we will, because this is a fantastic relationship. I can see. I just love listening to you and some opportunities and thinking. But we're going to meet again in 5 years' time, and we're looking back over the last 5 years and reminiscing. What's happened both professionally in the business and personally for you to say that was a fantastic 5 years?
I would say probably 2 things. Well, 3 things maybe. So the Time to Lead program will have become the de facto foundational leadership program for managers. And what I mean by that is I'm not looking to replace anybody else's leadership development program. Yeah, there's some really great programs out there. They're really great. I just think there are some fundamental holes in them, like asking people whether they want to be a manager before sending them on a management course is a good start. And that's one of the first modules. It's called Time to Decide. So I think having time to decide being that, or time to lead being that fundamental foundational thing within organizations, I think that would be a great place for Time to Lead to be. I think I will have been able to hire more people, which means having more people on the journey, which means I can do more thought leadership, more of the green stuff, more of the thinking. Because whenever I'm given time to actually do that thinking, I spot other opportunities where this can be used. So having that, having more people with me on the journey would be really, really great. At the moment, they're associates, and I'd rather have them working within the company and being fundamentally invested in the purpose and the vision that we're looking to achieve. And as an example of that, one of the areas that I really want to develop is part of the story is I want to create a world of better led people. And I don't think that starts at work. I actually think that starts at school. And so one of the things I've created very recently is something called Time to Revise. And the idea is that so often parents are going to GCSE revision evenings with their children, and they're being, told how they can help their kids prepare for their exams. And usually they'll walk out with a piece of paper and it's just got a blank calendar on it, and they'll be told, so go and help your kid create a revision calendar. And I'll be really honest, it doesn't really help very much. And this actually happened to a parent I know, and they asked me, and they said, surely we could use the colours and the concepts to help this be more interactive and show kids how to start to manage their time, at least in this area. And I said, yeah, I think we can. And so that led me to create Time to Revise. It's probably going to be called Time to Study, actually, because it can be used for homework as much as it can be for exams. And I want that to be made available to everybody for free. That is part of Diary Detox. That's a brand gift. That's what we want to give to the world, just to start kids thinking about their time a lot earlier and helping them talk to their parents and help their parents talk to their kids about where their time is going and how they can get the most out of themselves to get the results that they ultimately want. That would be a really great place to be.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for this great conversation around leadership. I love your passion in terms of creating better led people. I mean, what a fantastic statement of that. Thinking about time to lead, thinking about, are we the right people to be the leaders, the managers in the business, making it better through thinking, through communicating, through improving. And we had a really deep conversation about that real key thing, I think, which is leading with love. And I think that is a brilliant statement and so important in terms of doing that. And I love your passion to disrupt the world of leadership through leading with love in terms of doing that. And finishing off with a bit of discussion around the Diary Detox and how that can be used for a leader that needs to start to realize, time to do something different and find that green time, which I think is fascinating in terms of that. So thank you so much for that. We always finish with a quick fire round. So here we go. So if you could go back to younger you, what advice would you give yourself?
Carry on. It's all going to be okay.
Awesome. Which books would you recommend?
There's three. One is mine. I'm joking. No, I have written a book, but don't worry about that. I'm writing a second edition right now. There's a book on management actually called Good to Great. And I can't remember the guy who wrote it. What's his name?
Yeah, we'll find it.
Yeah, Good to Great. And that's a fantastic book. I think it's really, really clever. But very recently, I got another book. I actually got it through listening to a podcast by Professor Steve Peters. He was the guy that wrote The Chimp Paradox. Mm-hmm. And he's now written another book called A Path Through the Jungle. That book has been life-changing for me personally. And I think I've bought 5 copies of that in the last 3 months and given it to various people who I think need it, including me. And my wife has gone, yeah, you've changed. Which in a good way. Yeah, it's not a change, it's an improvement. You've improved.
Which podcast do you recommend?
So in terms of podcasts, there is this, there's a kind of comedy one. There's one called My Therapist Ghosted Me. It's nothing to do with therapy. It's 2 Irish ladies just bantering with each other. The language is quite fruity, so take it under advisement. Parental control should apply. But actually, from a business point of view, there is one podcast which I kind of come and go to, and it's the Diary of a CEO. It's Stephen Bartlett's podcast. But I've got to be honest, I think there are some real nuggets in the unexpected guests. Sometimes we get these real kind of A-list celebs, the Simon Sineks, and it's like, yeah, okay. I mean, they're okay, but there's no new story in there. But every so often you'll get somebody who you go, who's that? And you listen to it and you go, wow. And one of them was episode 140, a guy called Marcus Buckingham. And he was talking about, interestingly, love in work. And interestingly, that podcast has become pre-work for the Time to Decide module of the Time to Lead program. It's absolutely fascinating, and it's great for giving managers a new perspective on where they're going to go with their career. And the other one was the Professor Steve Peters one, episode 215, and that's where I got introduced to the book, A Path Through the Jungle. Absolutely brilliant. People that you don't know really popularly, but wow, real value given.
Brilliant. Wow, that's probably the most detailed answer I've ever given to that question. So 2 specific episodes for people to go and look at. Awesome. Brilliant. I would definitely go look for those. On your phone now, what apps do you use the most or make the most difference for you?
I would say the apps. Okay, so there's a few. There's mine, the Diary Detox app. I use that all the time. LinkedIn is a big one for me. That's where most of my clients are. There is an expense processing tool. I mean, expenses processing is red behavior, and I want to minimize that as much as possible by using that tool. That removes a lot of admin I have to do. And then also, other than Microsoft Outlook, which has all of my calendar and everything, I think another one is called Training Peaks. It's what I use for my triathlon training. It monitors what I'm doing, how I'm doing, and it uses red, amber, green coding to tell me whether I'm doing it well or not, which is quite handy.
And then finally, my favorite question of all. So who's had the most influence on you as a business leader?
Oh, I could cry. Oh, man. Yeah, I get a bit emotional with this. My wife. Because 6-7 years ago, she turned around and she said, "You are really miserable in the city. I'm doing pretty well, so why don't I give up? Why don't you give up your job? I'll look after us, and you go create a business. Change the world."
Improve the world.
Yeah, well, I would have said improve the world. She would have said change the world.
Absolutely.
I get really emotional
wasn't belittling her statement at all. Oh, that's just awesome. And so finally, how can people get hold of you, Paul?
Quite easily. So you can either go onto LinkedIn. I'm Paul Holbrook on LinkedIn. You can follow Diary Detox or Time to Lead on LinkedIn as well. Or you could go to the Diary Detox website, diarydetox.com, not to be confused with dairydetox.com, which I do have some fun with people when they misread that on my name badge at networking events. So yeah, diarydetox.com or Paul Holbrook on LinkedIn.
Oh, Paul, thank you so much for this fabulous conversation today, and I know people will get a lot out of it.
You're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if you're building and scaling your own business, you might well be interested in our book, The Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System. And it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's a practical handbook around scaling a business in a structured way. And you can order a copy on all your favorite online retailers, including an audio version, or you can find it and other supporting resources on our website, www.esusgroup.co.uk. That's esusgroup.co.uk, which is esusgroup.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.